Hi everyone, it's Duchess. I was recently playing through Parasite Eve on my Steam Deck and came to two very big realizations about it. First, the game kinda sucks, but it took me a very long time to come to that conclusion because the opening cinematic hit me incredibly hard and had such a strong hold on me, at least until I reached the third day in the game. I watched as a pristine opera house was engulfed in flames in a sequence that felt, for lack of a better word, pretty much impossible. The way the characters moved with such precision, such fluidity, it was hardly game-like. For a moment it felt real, but the longer I stared at the waxy skin and the perfectly rhythmic movements of the characters, the more I realized this wasn't reality. It was something else, an uncanny valley where the human body is rendered with surgical precision, but lacks a soul. It was beautiful, it was hyper-realistic for 1998, but it was deeply, fundamentally creepy. This was the magic of the PS1 FMV. It was a brief window in history where polygons tried to convince us they were human, and the failure to do so resulted in an atmosphere that gaming will never be able to replicate again. To understand why these scenes felt so alien, we have to understand what an FMV actually is. In the mid-90s, developers hit a wall. The PlayStation's hardware was revolutionary, but it was still just a box of chips trying to build worlds out of flat triangles. Enter the full motion video. Unlike the gameplay, which the console had to calculate and render frame by frame in real time, an FMV was essentially a pre-recorded movie file stored on the disc. When the game hit a cutscene, it stopped being a game engine and started being a video player. Developers would spend months on massive high-end workstations rendering a single 3-minute sequence. They were baking the lighting, the textures, and the physics into a video file that all the PS1 had to do was play back. It was a brilliant cheat code because it allowed games to show us worlds that the hardware wouldn't actually be able to render natively for another 10 or 15 years. But this creative realism came with a price, and that's where we fall headfirst into the Uncanny Valley. Because these models were being rendered on 90s supercomputers, they could have thousands of polygons, smooth curves, individual fingers, flowing hair. But the technology of the time lacked what we call subsurface scattering. In the real world, light doesn't just hit your skin and stop. It penetrates it, bounces around, and gives you that warm, living glow. In 1998 though, CGI light was just pure jank. This resulted in that iconic plastic aesthetic. Characters in Parasite Eve or Final Fantasy look like they were carved from expensive soap or polished plastic. Then there's the hardware's final limitation, compression. To fit these massive movie files onto a CD-ROM, they had to be crushed. This added a layer of grit to pretty much everything. When you combine hyper-articulated human movement with plastic skin and a layer of low-res digital fuzz, your brain starts crashing out because of how odd it all looks. It feels real because the movement is fluid, but it feels wrong because the texture is dead. The hardware wasn't powerful enough to bridge the gap to true realism, so it stranded us in this beautiful, creepy middle ground where the human movements are recognizable to us, but at its core, still so very foreign. If the Uncanny Valley is a dip in our comfort zone, Parasite Eve definitely plays on it, literally giving us a 10-hour-long field trip through it. The plotline alone fits the aesthetic almost to a fault. The game is centered on mitochondria revolting against the human body. This is where the waxy limitation of 90s CGI became its greatest asset. Let's just take a moment to examine this opening alone, because honestly, this was such a striking moment to me. In the opening, Aya Bria, the protagonist and also a police officer, is on a date with this lame dude at the opera house when the leading actress seemingly causes the entire place to go down with her singing. At this point, the player doesn't know what exactly is going on, but the shock of it is enough to captivate anyone. Just look at the face of this woman while she's singing. There's something so eerily beautiful about it, especially the way her arms and her body moves as she performs. When the audience begins to spontaneously combust, we can see the fear build in Aya's eyes, but there's a limit to how much expression can be conveyed. There's so much more happening in her face, but the technological limitations prevent SquareSoft from shaping that image we all see in our heads into a reality. There is a specific, sickening fluidity to it. Think about the scene where the dog Shiba transforms. On the PS1's actual gameplay hardware, that would have looked like a mess of shifting triangles. But in FMV, we see the skin stretch like wet latex. We see the muscle fibers tear and reform. Because the textures look so obviously fake, the gore doesn't look bloody in a traditional sense, but it looks synthetic and wrong. It taps into a very specific fear, that our bodies are just biological machines that can be retooled into something else. But where Parasite Eve used FMV to show us too much, Silent Hill used it to make us feel like we weren't seeing enough. The FMVs in Silent Hill are legendary for their dirty look. Team Silent leaned into the hardware's compression and turned it into a cinematic style. They utilized extreme close-ups on faces that were almost human, but had those dead staring eyes we talked about. Take the mutation scene with Lisa Garland. There's a dreamlike quality to the editing. Compared to Parasite Eve, these FMVs are incredibly short, most only several seconds long, but that's really all they needed to create a captivating narrative. I take a particular interest in Lisa's scenes because of how innocently she's portrayed. When you first meet her, it almost feels like she belongs in a different game. Her nurse uniform seems almost cartoonish in contrast to the faded grays and white tones of Silent Hill. But that's why there's a strange sense of ethereal beauty and fear during her mutation scene. The way she looks, the way she moves, it seems so pained, but there's a choreographed beauty to her movements, intentional, rhythmic, precise. Konami used the FMVs in Silent Hill to escalate the nightmare, but while games like Parasite Eve used the Uncanny Valley to unsettle us, and Konami used it to induce nightmares, SquareSoft also used it to make us fall in love. They were masters of visual flexing, and if you track the Final Fantasy series on the PS1, you can actually see the industry's soul being forged in real time. Final Fantasy VII was the pioneer, but it still had one foot in the past. The FMVs here were enhanced cartoons. The characters had exaggerated chibi features, massive eyes, gravity-defying hair, and limbs that still felt a bit like action figures. There was a charm to it, but it was safe. It didn't try to convince you these were real people. It tried to convince you that your favorite anime had come to life in 3D. But then 1999 happened. The jump from Final Fantasy VII to Final Fantasy VIII is perhaps the most drastic aesthetic shift in the history of the franchise, comparable to the jump from Final Fantasy VI to VII. Suddenly, the sheepy proportions were gone. Squall and Rinoa were modeled with realistic human ratios. Their skin had that signature waxy sheen, but now it was used to simulate the glow of a ballroom or the sweat of a battlefield. So then why the change? What happened between these two games? Well, to answer it simply, Hollywood happened. Square was chasing cinema. They wanted to prove that games could compete with Hollywood. By moving towards realistic human anatomy, they were raising the stakes. When Squall and Cypher clash in that opening duel, the uncanny realism makes the violence feel heavier. The way their hair catches the wind adds a romantic cinematic flair that made us feel like we were playing a movie, not a game. Then came Final Fantasy IX, which represents the absolute peak of the PS1's FMV capabilities. Instead of continuing the push towards hyperrealism seen in Final Fantasy VIII, Square took a step back and asked, what if we used all this power to create the perfect storybook? In Final Fantasy IX, the Uncanny Valley is bridged by style. The characters are stylized again. Vivi is a shadow with glowing eyes, Steiner is a clanking suit of armor, but the execution is flawless. The lighting is warmer, the waxiness is replaced by a painterly texture, and the animation is more expressive than ever. It proved that the magic of FMV didn't just come from trying to look real. It came from using that pre-rendered space to create a level of detail that the real world couldn't offer. By the time Final Fantasy VIII entered production, Square had mastered the motion stream technology. They learned how to overlap 3D gameplay models on top of FMV backgrounds seamlessly. Square had also just opened their massive Square Pictures studio in Hawaii. They were pouring millions into R&D for their upcoming feature film. The realistic human models in Final Fantasy VIII were essentially trickle-down tech from their attempt to conquer Hollywood. Spider-Man on the PS1 is a perfect example of this. Think about those cutscenes. You had Rino Romano giving us a witty, pitch-perfect Peter Parker, Jennifer Hale as Black Cat, and even Stan Lee himself narrating the opening. They were delivering full cinematic performances. But here's the thing, when you pair that high-level human voice acting with the waxy FMV models of the time, the Uncanny Valley gets even weirder. You have a voice that sounds exactly like a real person coming out of a digital puppet that is almost human but not quite. It's that specific sensory friction, the real voice versus the unreal face, that makes these scenes stick in your brain for decades. Speaking of that game, I actually made a full video praising Spider-Man PS1 a while back. I have so much love for that title, but unfortunately that video went completely under the algorithm's radar. I made a scheduling error during the premiere and tried to fix it right in the middle of the live broadcast, and I'm pretty sure the algorithm just gave up on me after that. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. It's a labor of love and literally took me over 10 hours to edit together. And while we're talking about the channel, I've noticed that a huge chunk of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed. I'm really trying to grow this channel and get my deep dives out to more people, so if you stumbled across my content a few times now and you're enjoying the vibe, it will mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button and engage with the video. It's the best way to make sure the next scheduling error doesn't bury the work I'm doing here. By the time the PlayStation 2 era came around, FMVs were still there, and they were breathtaking. Think of the water in Final Fantasy X during that amazing, breathtaking romantic love scene between Titus and Yuna. Oh my gosh, I was melting while watching these two lovebirds. I can't, they're my babies. Anyways, they were sharper and more fluid, but the gameplay was catching up. The jump from playing to watching was becoming less of a shock and more of a smooth transition. By the time we hit the PlayStation 3 and PS4, the line practically vanished. Games like Uncharted or The Last of Us prided themselves on seamless storytelling. The cutscenes were rendered in the same engine you were playing in. The Uncanny Valley was being paved over by raw processing power. We finally got the realism we were promised, but in the process we lost that dreamlike otherness that made the PS1 era so haunting. However, FMVs haven't fully disappeared, they just evolved into something else. Today, they live in reveal trailers. We've entered a strange, cynical phase of gaming where we are constantly shown cinematic reveals with these gorgeous, high-fidelity FMVs that look like big-budget movies. They promise perfectly articulated faces, realistic cloth physics, and an atmosphere thick with detail, but then the game launches, and because modern games are massive open-world machines running on complex physics engines, things break. It's the Uncanny Valley all over again, but without the artistry. At least the FMVs in 1998 were always a reward to the player, allowing them a glimpse into a world the console wished it could show you. Today, FMV is just a marketing tactic that promises a world the game can't actually sustain. We've gone from realistic but creepy to realistic but crappy. Maybe that's why I'm still thinking about Parasite Eve. The PS1 FMV never lied to us. We knew those waxy, plastic-looking humans weren't the game itself. We knew they were a beautiful, fleeting illusion that only lived as long as the disc kept spinning. There was an honesty to that uncanny creepiness. It was an ethereal, digital ghost haunting a box of 32-bit triangles, trying its hardest to convince us it was alive. We might have more pixels now, and our transitions might be seamless, but I'll always have a soft spot for the hauntingly beautiful cinematic style of PS1 full motion videos. And that's my take on it. If you're someone who loves exploring the depths of the gaming community, hit that subscribe button below and turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon. See you guys later.
In a world of pixels, where magic's alive, Duchess brings the joy, it's where dreams thrive. With cozy games, she lights up our days, from Stardew Fields to Genshin's lush ways.